So, what's going on guys, Kate is here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today we are taking a closer look at the top 4 best escape builds in Albion Online. At the start I will show you different builds that are the fastest weapons to get away with. Then I will explain the playstyle and what you should be doing to never die from gankers, and then last but not the least, at the end of the video I will give you the best tips and strategy behind moving through PvP zones, and what things I have learned from playing this game for many years now, and much more. So with all this said, let's get right into it. Then moving over to the first weapon, which is the one and only bloodletter build. So for the weapon of choice we go with the bloodletter and pick the second Q, second W and first passive. And for the offhand you pick the mist color. Then moving over to the helmet, which is the harvester cap, and you go with the first ability. Later in the video I will explain when you want to use gathering gear and when not, but all that you have to keep in mind is to use the gathering gear for the first build. So I have unlocked the tier 6 fiber gathering, and that's why I picked the harvester gear. But for example, if you are a skinner, you want to buy the skinner gear and etc. Then for my chest armor I went with the harvester's garb, and for it I chose the second ability. And lastly for shoes I picked the harvester work boots and went with the second ability. Then for my choice of capes I'm using the Fort Sterling cape, and for consumables I have the pork pie, resistance potions, and then for my mount I have the swift claw. Okay, and now let me quickly explain the playstyle, and then later why I chose the things I'm using and why they are the best. So first things first, let me tell you about the abilities. So your Q is a small jump that will make you jump a little but further than normal, but you never want to use it too close to enemies. Then your W is a simple dash, and your E is another dash but which deals damage, so the same like for Q ability, you never want to use it if you are in a way of enemies or close to them. Then my R ability is an ambush spell which will make you go invisible. Then my D ability is a block spell where I become immune to any damage. And lastly we have the F ability, which is the fastest and best running boots in the game. After using the boots ability it will take few seconds for them to stack up to the highest speed, but when it does you'll be able to be super fast and you can beat anyone while running if they don't have the same boots. And then as for potions we have the resistance, which when using will give us increased defensive resistance. So if players ever get too close to you we can survive for much longer. And as I've mentioned, at the end of the video I will explain the best strategy you want to use to move around zones. So now let's imagine right now that we just got dismounted by a bunch of enemies. So first things first, you will have 5-second cooldown on your abilities. And as soon as you're on your feet you want to keep on moving to the closest map entrance, or just away from the enemies. And if a lot of enemies by the time you get spells already are attacking you, then you want to use your resistance potions. Then activate your F ability and then use your W dash. So if there are no enemies in front of you, use your second dash E ability. And keep on using your Q small jumps as long as you don't hit any enemies. And if you get a distance or there are more than 10 gankers and they have catched up to you, then use your R ability and you will go invisible. If the enemies block the place you were going to, then go around them, or if they are super hard on one direction then go to the other one. The main most important objective you want to achieve with this escape build is to either way go to the map's exit and zone out to the next map and get then protection bubble, or on the other hand get far away from enemies to be able to mount up again and then run away to a different zone. And I'm about to be done with this build, but there's one more thing you may be wondering, why I didn't mention on when to use the D ability. Well, this one is the last resort in case the enemies catch up to you, or you do actually get to a zone's entrance but there are even more players camping and blocking the entrance with firewalls and other spells. Well, then we use the D ability and we become immune to any damage for a few seconds, so we can go through firewalls or other objects that may be blocking us. So in conclusion, this is the strongest and easiest escape build ever, and I have used this build to escape plus 10 or 15 man ganking groups. And for the equipment, feel free to use cheap weapons, the cheap escape and offhand, because your damage doesn't matter but your abilities do. So save money in that department and invest it in better mounts or better bag. So if you were looking for the best overall escape build in the entire game, then here it is. Then going over to the second weapon, which this time is the double-bladed staff. So for the abilities you want to go with the second Q, second W and first passive. Then for the head armor you go with the mercenary's hood and pick the third ability and first passive. Then for your chest armor you go with the guardian's armor and pick the third ability and first passive. And then lastly for shoes, get the soldier boots and pick the third ability and second passive. Then for my choice of capes, I'm using the Fort Sterling cape, and for consumables I have the omelets, resistance potions, and then for my mount I have the swift claw. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you that this build is not good for PvP, but it's strictly meant for escaping. But with that in mind, if you don't like gathering gear for some reason, or you don't even do gathering but want to transport items, and you are looking for the best of the best build, that you have more chances of survival, then this is that build for you. If you are gathering, I would always recommend to use gathering gear, because it will give you bonuses and the escaping abilities are amazing. So you're feel free to use this build, just take the double-bladed staff and use it with the previous build's gathering gear, and then you will have another amazing and super strong escape build. But like I said, if you don't care about gathering and just strictly surviving and escaping, then this is the second best build for you. The armor will give you super damage resistance, and the weapon abilities will give you super quick cooldowns. So talking about the abilities, let's move over to the weapons playstyle. So your Q spell will do a small roll, which similarly like in the previous build, will give you a super small speed boost. But if you get hit while using the ability, then your movement speed will be increased for 20%. But again, remember to not use the Q ability close to enemies, because we don't want for you to get into combat and not have the option to enter zones. Then by pressing your W spell, it will give you 30% speed boost for a few seconds. And lastly, we have the E ability, which will be a super far and big jump. But again, you don't want enemies to be in your way when you are using the spell. Then when you use your R ability, it will create a circle, in which if enemies are hitting you, their damage will be decreased, and they will be slowed for 50%. Then our D spell is a cleanse in case you get stunned or stopped, and you can use it to remove all negative effects. And lastly, we have the F ability, which will give you speed, but it will take few seconds to get maximum stacks. So now again, let's imagine that we have been dismounted, so as soon as you get your abilities from cooldowns, if enemies are right on you, use the resistance potions, and right after activate your W ability and then use your F boots ability. In few seconds you should be a bit farther away from the enemies, but if at any point they stun you, then right away use the D ability and cleanse yourself. But when you just get a little bit away and you see a path where you can use your other abilities without hitting any player, then use your E spell and keep on using your Q as soon as it gets off cooldown. And lastly, if they ever catch up to you the second time, then use your R ability and decrease all damage by 60%. So in conclusion, if you're looking for a similarly strong build like the bloodletter, then here it is. Then as for our next weapon, we have the dual swords build. So the weapon of choice is the dual swords, and for the abilities you pick the first Q, second W and third passive. Then for the head armor you pick the knight's helmet, and go with the third ability and first passive. Then for your chest armor, choose the guardian's armor and go with the third ability and first passive. And then lastly for shoes, get the soldier boots and pick the third ability and second passive. Then for my choice of capes, I'm using the 4th Sterling cape, and for consumables I have the omelets, resistance potions, and then for my mount I have the swift claw. Okay, so now let's go over to the weapons playstyle. First things first, you don't ever want to use your Q spell. Then as for the W, when you use it, it will give you extra increased speed and defensive. And then as for the E ability, we have another jump. Like in the first and second build, it will deal damage while making you move faster, so use it only when not in front of players. Then as for the R ability, the same like in the second build, it creates a circle, in which enemies are slowed and will deal 60% less damage. Then as for our D ability, when you use it, you become immune to stuns and slowness effects. And last but not the least, we have the F ability, which is the same run spell like in the previous builds, and I have already explained on how it works in detail. So then if you get dismounted and if you have a bunch of players on you, you first of all want to use the resistance potions, then activate your D ability and then right after use the W spell and activate the F ability. By the time the running stacks get to maximum, you should gain a bit of a distance. So use your E ability and keep on running and using your W and E as soon as they get off cooldown. And lastly, if enemy gets too close to you and starts attacking you, use the R ability and not only slow enemies but make them deal less damage. So in conclusion, this is another viable build and weapon to use. In my opinion, the first and second build were the best ones, but if you really enjoy the swords or you just want some variety, then here's another good build which gives you more defense but in return you sacrifice the mobility. And now for our last and final weapon, we have the second double-bladed staff build, but this time with the full invisibility playstyle. So the weapon of choice is the double-bladed staff, and for the abilities we go with the second Q, second W and first passive. Then for my head armor I pick the mercenary's hood, and went with the third ability and first passive. Then for the chest armor I went with the assassin's jacket, and chose the third ability and first passive. Then lastly for shoes I get the soldier boots and pick the third ability and second passive. Then for my choice of capes I'm using the 4th Sterling cape, And for my consumables I have the omelets and invisibility potions, and then for my mount I have the swift claw. And as we just looked already into the double-bladed staff, so let's go straight to the gear abilities. So your R spell is an ambush which will make you go invisible for a few seconds. And then your D and F spell is the same cleanse and wanderlust, where you get speed stacks and move a lot faster. So besides all of this, let's go over what things you should be doing after getting dismounted. So as soon as you get your cooldowns back up, use your W and F spell. If at any point you get stunned, remember to cleanse yourself with the D ability. And then when you have gained a bit of a distance from gankers, use the Q and E abilities. And now instead of straight going for the closest entrance or the most obvious place, use your ambush ability and go to the opposite direction, on where the enemies think you would be going. And then as soon as the invisibility wears off, use the invis potions and keep on moving till you're far away from enemies and can mount up. So in conclusion, this last build is very tricky because it can work if you come across very new and few players, but if you're facing more than plus player groups and older players, they will play it smart and you won't be able to fool them so easily with the invisibility. So pick which build you like the most and have fun playing. Okay, so as I've just promised, we looked into the top 4 best escape builds, so now let's go over to the main strategy on what you should be doing when moving through PvP zones. So first things first, when teleporting and moving through the first portal zone, you should be 99% of the time safe, because as soon as you teleport, you will get protection bubble, and if you ever find a lot of enemies, you can just go back to a city and teleport to a different portal. But then when you are in a zone and just generally moving from zone to zone, we have one of the fastest mounts in the game, which is the Swift Claw. So you should never be worried about players catching up to you, but instead be aware of other mobs. That's why when we get into a new zone, right away I open my minimap by pressing N, and I chose which path and route I want to take. So for here in this example, I want to avoid roads, other guild hideouts and gathering hotspots. So I chose to go to this route, and every few seconds if I get lost or find too many mobs, I never run through them but just circle around and keep on opening my minimap so I would see where to go and I would never get stuck in a bad position. Then when you are gathering, of course always stay in a circle of your mount even if you're killing a mob. But if you're simply gathering, always have your cursor on the mount, so as soon as you see a player you can click on mount up and run away. Then as soon as I see a player, I again open my minimap, and only just in a case if enemy has more friends, I find a different gathering spot. Or if I were just gathering something special like 4.3 material, then I just leave it, go gathering something else for a few seconds, and then go back to the resource I was gathering. But as soon as you get worried or get alerted by enemies, open your minimap and decide which zone entrances you'll be escaping in, just in case if you get attacked. So for me it would be usually the zone I just came out of, or just the entrance closest to me. And lastly, if you do get chased by gankers and there are more than 10 of them, then of course keep on running away. Don't forget to avoid mobs and opening the minimap, so you would see where they are, but as well don't ever be afraid to try to juke them. So for example, if you're running in just one direction, then see a player in front of you dismounted, so then you completely turn around to the other players who are on their mounts. The best thing about escaping is that they have to follow you, so use the zone and terrain to your advantage and don't let it control you but control it. And the last thing I want to mention is that you may found it weird that for all my Q and E spells, I always told you to only use it when enemies are not in the way. It is because you get locked in a PvP and can enter different portals if you attack a player. So here for example, this is the way you want to use your damage mobility spells, and then this is the way you don't want to. So you can see the difference between both gameplays. One hits an enemy and the other one basically does the same thing, just avoids the enemy and doesn't get locked into PvP, but still uses the ability and tries to get away, so keep in mind this. As this video is strictly made for builds only, I could go on for hours explaining different strategies you could use. So if you want to learn more about how to be a good gatherer and what are the good escaping strategies, then check my other videos. And that's about it. So I really do appreciate everyone for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, feedback or different builds that you would recommend to other players, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and you won't miss any more amazing content from me. With all of this said, you have an amazing day and I'll catch you in my next video. So take it easy, peace. Yo, I ain't here for